Welcome to the first senior exhibition of the day for Tom Reilly. So Tom, it'll be 15-20 minutes. You know the whole spiel, right, for the presentation. And I'll give you a show of my hand when you've got 5 minutes remaining. And then at the end of the presentation, audience members will retreat to the hallway while the panelists have a conversation about your presentation, and we'll invite you right back in. We're looking forward to this. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, I am Tom Reilly, and today I'm here to talk to you about how learning a new art form will help me prepare for new learning in college. In choosing my topic, I considered two factors. I considered wanting to do something that would help me prepare for college, because I'm going to art school next year, and I have no doubt that there's going to be hundreds of things that I've never done or seen before there, and so I figured that I would want to start in early on learning something new, and I wanted to do something that would honor the memory of my mom, who, as most of you know, passed away this January. And my essential question focused more on my future college experiences. I expect to see a lot of things that I've never seen before, and I want to prepare myself for that by experimenting with something completely new. And I figured that if I could pick something up new very quickly, then I could do it in college too, when I had probably less time to do it than I do now. And in choosing the art that I wanted to do, I knew that my mom loved birds. She was an ornithologist, and she was a very respected ornithologist. She loved birds. Birds were always around our house. We had hummingbird feeders and bird feeders everywhere. And I also knew that she was an avid fan of stained glass work. She'd never done it before, but she'd always wanted to do it, and she'd always respected the talent and precision it took to make things like that. And so I figured that my Senior X presentation could be about a stained glass window that featured birds as the subject. My prior knowledge of stained glass was non-existent. I had no idea how to do it. I only had assumptions on how to do it, such as you needed to cut the glass and stick it together. That's all I knew. But when going in, I was not completely shooting in the dark, because I have had a lot of experience with other forms of art, through some of the graphite drawings I've done. And I knew that I could carry over the fundamentals of art that I have a firm grasp on, such as composition and form and perspective and proportion. And I could use those with positive effect in the stained glass making process. What I thought would happen, I thought that cutting the glass would be the easy part, and that soldering the glass together would be difficult, mostly because I had no idea what soldering was. And if I don't know what it is, I figure it's going to be difficult for me to do usually. And I know that I have a steady hand, and I can cut a straight line very easily, and I can draw a straight line, and I figured that cutting the glass would not be that difficult. And so without any hands-on knowledge on stained glass work, I decided to start in on the process. Step 0. Before I dared to try anything, I needed to meet with my mentor, MDIHS, who is a very experienced and talented stained glass artist. And from our first to last meeting, Melanie has taught me everything she knew and was always very excited to help me out and to show me how to do new things. And through her assistance and advice, I was able to pick up the entire stained glass making process very quickly. Step 1, draw the pattern. In order to make a stained glass window, you need to have a drawn pattern. The pattern helps you make sure that your pieces will fit together in a structurally sound and visibly appealing way. This is a very difficult part of the process. You have to be careful with the complexity of the pattern because sometimes what you can draw on paper can't be replicated in glass. Whoops. It's a very limited medium. And according to How to Design Stained Glass with 84 Patterns by Jenny French, you have to take into account the seams of the different pieces of glass because they all need to fit together just right in order for your window to look professional. After drawing the pattern for your window, you will need to trace over it once again with a layer of graphite paper underneath it and sturdy paper under that. I used a manila folder, but you could use other materials if you want. This is done because after you trace it onto the folder, you need to cut out all the individual pieces of the pattern because you're going to lay the pieces on the glass to cut them out. And here I have one of my patterns that I drew, the hummingbird. And I tried to make it look organic and have the seams fit together. And if you want, you can pass it around. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that.
Sure.
All right.
Absolutely.
Pass it around. Step 2, select your glass. The next step in making a stained glass window is to choose your glass. The choice of glass is one of the most important parts of the process. Different types of glass can serve different purposes. They can be parts of the background, they can be parts of the subject, and they can make your piece look more realistic or artistic. And sometimes the pattern in the glass can save you time and effort because if the flow of the pattern is traveling the same way as the flow of your own stained glass pattern, it could save you a cut. It could save you making 2 different pieces, and you can just combine them into one piece. And I was able to travel to the stained glass shop in Waterville to select my glass. There are many types of glass that are all made in many different ways. For example, drapery glass is made by folding sheets of hot glass on top of one another and then pressing it down into a flat sheet. And Baroque glass is made by mixing 2 or more glasses and then swirling them together in artsy patterns. The pictures above, which can be found at freepatternsforstainedglass.com, depict only a few of the many glasses that are available on the market. And I have a couple glasses here. This is a Baroque glass, and 3 glasses were mixed together and then hand swirled around to make this pretty pattern. And this is, pretty sure this is what happened here too. 2 glasses were mixed together and they were swirled around to make it look pretty and artistic. Step 3, cutting the glass. Once you've chosen your glass, it's time to start it on your cutting. In order to cut your glass, you need a glass cutter and some pliers. Also, don't forget to wear protective goggles. The first step to cutting glass is tracing the piece you cut out of your hand-drawn pattern from the manila folder onto your surface of the glass. After you have your guidelines, you can begin cutting. So you trace over the small piece with a Sharpie. And the score. When you press your glass cutter into a piece of glass and push it across its surface, it will leave a thin, barely visible line behind. This line is called a score. The score is the most important part of the glass cutting process, and when attempting a score, one must be extremely careful and keep a couple of things in mind. You need to keep your score relatively straight, because when you cut your score, you're going to break it off of the rest of this sheet of glass with a pair of pliers. And if the score has too many sharp angles, or if it's too curvy, it won't break on the score line, and it will break just straight or in any different way, and you'll have to start over, and that's no fun. And I learned in the book, Stained Glass Basics, by Chris Rich, that as pictured here, you can create deep curves in a piece of glass by layering slightly curved scores on top of one another and then breaking them off one by one. And the image on this slide depicts that. Another thing to keep in mind that's very important is to keep even pressure when scoring your glass. If your pressure is too light, a score line will not appear and your glass will just break in any way that it feels like breaking. And if the pressure is too great, the strain on the glass will cause it to shatter. And that's no fun. That's not good for anybody. And so you need to find a good middle pressure and then lightly keep it all the way through your score. And I have a piece of glass right here, and I thought I would demonstrate, because this is a fun presentation. So, this is the glass cutter. You hold it like this. Make sure there's no stuff under the surface of your glass because it could negatively affect your score if you run over it. And all I need to do is start at the end. Do you hear that noise? That's a good noise. If you don't hear that noise, you probably did it wrong. And here we go. I use my pliers, and I use that black line right there, and I put it right in the middle of the score line, and then I'm just going to press down. And it breaks. And everyone's happy. And that's how you make a score on a sheet of glass. Step 4 is grinding. After cutting a piece of glass, the edges will be sharp and jagged and will most likely not look a lot like you want it to look. And it will not fit the pattern. In order to refine the shape of your glass piece, you need to take it to a glass grinder. You can work your glass on the grinder until it looks identical to your cutout pattern, and then place it on your uncut pattern to see how it fits. As well as making the piece look good, the grinder takes away the sharp edges of the glass, which is very important for the next step. I had some problems with my grinder. It was a very old grinder, and the grinding material actually ground all the way down, and there's just bare metal here. I'll pass that around to you. You can do that. It's important to keep, as you can see right here, there's a sponge slightly pressing against the grinding wheel to, at all times, keep it wet, because if it is not wet at all times, that will happen to your grindstone. It will wear away your grinding material, and then you'll have to buy a new one, and they're very expensive. Also, in another picture, you can see that there is a smaller, thinner grinding wheel on top, a thicker one, that can be used to get into smaller places that you wouldn't normally be able to get into with the big grinder. Step 5, foiling. There is a step in between the storing and soldering the glass where copper foil is wrapped around the edges of your glass pieces. This thin layer of copper is what the solder will stick to solidify your piece. Although this process sounds easy, it is actually very tedious and requires concentration and finesse. The foil needs to wrap around the glass evenly and needs to be smoothed and flattened down onto the glass. Any bump or crevice or divot present after foiling will be seen when the solder is applied and will make your piece look bad. So you must make sure that your foil is tight, fitting, form-fitting as it can possibly be. Also, if your glass's edges are too sharp, they could cut the copper foil, which is why it's very important to use the grinder. It smooths down the edges. Once all of your pieces are foiled, you can move on to the final step, which is soldering. Once all of your glass pieces are cut, foiled, and arranged, it's time to start soldering. The soldering process is not all that difficult, but takes a certain amount of skill to make it visually appealing. The first step is to coat your foiled edges in a chemical called flux. After you do this, the solder will flow onto the foil and solidify easier than it would without it. After this, you need a soldering iron and a spool of thick lead wire. After heating up your soldering iron, you need to press the lead into the iron's tip, and the lead will melt and drip off onto your glass. You don't just want to drip solder everywhere. As you can see in the picture, I'm dripping solder on the joints of the pieces so it stays together. And once I drip it all on the joints, it's solidified, and I can take these pins out that you see here. They were used to keep the piece tightly packed together. And once all of the joints are soldered together, you can go in with the iron itself and drag the lead across the foiled edges, coating the entire piece in lead and solidifying the window. You want to add lead to the piece as often as you can, and you can always take it away if there's too much by picking it up with the soldering iron. It will stick to the soldering iron. The objective is to make your solder lines clean and slightly rounded on top, according to a video tutorial I watched. This process is called finish soldering. You don't want them too flat, as you'll be able to see the creases where they fit together with the foil if the layer is too thin. Continue this process until the whole window is covered. And once you're finished, you can start on something new. The final pieces. As you can see over there, I made 2 stained glass frogs. One was made of cathedral glass, that's the blue one, and the other was made of the glass I like to call frog glass, because it looks like a frog. Those were my 2 practice stained glass pieces. And after I finished those, I was feeling a little confident. I decided to draw my own pattern for a large stained glass panel. I'll pass this around. And after a couple weeks of hard work, I was able to make it right here.
Well,
I don't know how many pieces this is. I know over here there are 65. So it's probably around 100 pieces. It took about 2 weeks to make. And the hummingbird you saw in the slideshow is right here. I embedded it in there. And I thought my mom would like this. I did. I'll put it up here, and after I'm done, you guys can come look at it. I think it's pretty. What actually happened? Oh, what happened? What happened? That's okay. I'm okay. No, I'm not. There was something wrong with my computer. Okay. What actually happened? What I thought would happen versus what happened was actually the opposite. Cutting the glass actually turned out to be the hardest part, and solidifying it with solder